Happy New Year and welcome to the Friday Forum for January 10th, 2025. This is the 225th Friday Forum in a series hosted by ICLR, the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction. ICLR is Canada's leading source for disaster resilience knowledge. Each month, we present recently completed research related to ICLR's mission to make Canada more resilient to natural disasters. I'm your host, Dr. Keith Porter, ICLR's Chief Engineer. I'm speaking to you from London, Ontario, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lunapiwak, and Attawandaron people. Our last Friday Forum in December saw David Gregory of CoreLogic updating us on the state-of-the-art in insurance single-site risk assessment. As a former CAT modeler, I found his talk really interesting. If you missed it, check out the video at www.iclr.org/workshops. Our next Friday Forum will occur on February 14th, 2025, when IBHS's Mark Vaughn and Amanda West will tell us about IBHS's new Wildfire Prepared Home Certification Program. Anticipating that February Friday Forum on Wildfire Prepared Homes, today is the first of two talks about wildfire. Today, Dr. Mike Flannigan of Thompson Rivers University is going to tell us how climate change is affecting fire activity and our options to coexist with fire. He's also offered to discuss the fires burning in Los Angeles and hence the live imagery you're seeing on your screen right now. I'm particularly interested in Mike's talk for personal reasons. I used to live in a neighborhood of Los Angeles that's currently under an evacuation warning for the Eden Fire. My old neighborhood is more than a kilometer from the wildland urban interface, which tells me that the rules of who is and who is not exposed to WUI fire are changing. As a matter of fact, looking at the evacuation warnings and orders right now, there are places under evacuation orders more than 10 kilometers from the Eden Fire. Big change. More of us are exposed to wildfire than I think we might have thought a while ago. Mike is an expert in fire science. He's a professor at, that did all that. Mike is an expert in fire science. He's a professor at Thompson Rivers University, and he directs Canada Wildfire, which is a partnership of governments and universities that research wildland fire science. Now, before we begin, here's our agenda. Our webinar will last 90 minutes. Our speaker will present for about half that time. Then I'm going to moderate questions for the rest of the time. Please feel free to chat your questions into the Q&A box. I'll try to pose your questions in the order they appear in the Q&A box. If we have a lot of questions, I may only pose your first question, then move on to others, then circle back to your additional questions. Our webinar is recorded. ICLR will post the slides and a link to the video on Monday or so. So if you have colleagues who couldn't attend, let them know. You'll find the video and a PDF of our speaker's deck at www.iclr.org/workshops. And with that, I'll hand it over to Mike.
Thanks, Keith. I'm coming to you today from Kamloops, British Columbia, the traditional and unceded territory of the Tecumseh people. So I've been watching these fires in Los Angeles since Tuesday noonish, and this is current. This is a geostationary satellite, and it turns at the same speed as the Earth, so it sits over the same spot and takes pictures every 10 minutes. And this is what, if you were sitting on top of the satellite, this is close to what your eye would see. And I'll put it into motion here, and you can see the night lights of Los Angeles and other cities. You can see the smoke. That's the Pacific, the Palisades fire, and that's the Eden fire. And there's not much smoke coming from these other fires. Having seen this for days, this is as quiet as it's been, believe it or not. It's not done by any stretch of the imagination. And you've been hearing reports of 10,000 structures, and that probably will go up. Hundreds of thousands of people evacuated, power shutdowns, unfortunately 10 deaths, and that may unfortunately go up. People evacuated on the Pacific Coast Highway, abandoned their cars that blocked the road for first responders, and they had to use bulldozers to get, the winds were howling, okay? I'm going to switch now. This is Ram MB from Colorado State, and it's my favorite spot. I mean, other people have other favorites. I'm now going to a mid-infrared. This is very sensitive to temperatures, hot temperatures, like fire, okay? And you can see right now the Eaton fire isn't showing much of a signature. The Palisade fire is hot on especially the east end, but somewhat on the west end. So it's over 30,000 acres have burned thus far from these fires, and I expect that number to go up. The forecast, well, some wind today, some wind tomorrow, quiet on Sunday, and then kind of windy again, but nothing like what we saw Tuesday night, Wednesday. Another popular site is Firms, and this is from a couple of days ago, and you can see, and you can zoom in, it's on top of Google Earth, and you can see some of the subdivisions that have been lost. Okay? And this is the Eaton fire up over here. Yeah, it's quite devastating, and all hands on deck. And you may have, Canada has resources down there helping. 2 water bombers. The one was damaged by a drone yesterday, so they're sending more. BC sending planes and crews. It's all hands on deck. Now I'm going to stop viewing from my browser and go to my PowerPoint. I'm not done with the LA fires yet, okay? Santa Ana fires do occur in January, but it's not prime season. September, October, November, December are. And in terms of area burned, the graph on the left, it's not common to see much area burned, okay? Actually, area burns on the right, number of fires on the left. And this is from a paper which I'll show you in a second. SAR stands for Santa Ana winds. There are fires that start without the Santa Ana winds and with the Santa Ana winds. And Santa Ana winds are typically northeast and, of sufficient speed. And here's, since 1950 to present, looking at the right-hand side, that's the Santa Ana wind events. And you can see that, about half of them are started by power lines. And I would expect this event that at least half of them will be power lines. And the winds were so strong, I wouldn't be surprised if it was even more, despite the PSPS, the public safety power shutdowns, which affected 300,000 to 400,000 people, but population in this area is 10 million plus. So yeah, it's now we published some work last year, and we found for Santa Ana wind events, the primary factors were how strong the winds were and how much drought you have. This event had winds gusting to 160 kilometers per hour. It's at the extreme end of Santa Ana's. But the rain, okay, this is from a station in really downtown Los Angeles, and you can see that the current normals are in the top row, and usually by December you're getting significant rains in an average year. This year it's been almost nothing, okay? They had a little bit in November, almost nothing in December, and nothing so far in January. So it's bone dry, and you get the winds, you get ignition. I often say there's a simple recipe for a wildfire, and you'll hear this in my talk, vegetation, fuel, ignition, and weather. So I looked at the forecast. Is there any hope? And there is some hope in about a week for some rain coming to the area. Hopefully this forecast holds. Some of the other forecasts have less precipitation, but this is the best model in the world. It's the European model. Despite our models in Canada and the United States, the European model is head and shoulders above other models. So I'm hoping this is right, and we get to see some rain coming in next Thursday, Friday. But until then, it's bone dry and ready to roll. Now, I'm sure you may have some questions about the Los Angeles fires. I've been doing lots of media interviews on it, but we're going to hold the Q&A till then. So now I'm to the talk I prepared prior to the Los Angeles County Valley's basin catching on fire. So climate change and wildfires. I've been talking about climate change and wildfires since the 1980s. In the 1990s, published work with others saying urgent action is needed now. I'm getting tired of saying urgent action is needed now, because urgent action really, we have to do something about climate change, and it does impact fire as well. We'll discuss. So, often when I give a talk, students, I say, that picture, is that a fire or is that a thunderstorm? What is that? And it's both. It's a pyrocumulonimbus, a pyro-CB for short. These are very intense firestorms, and we're seeing more and more of them. I'm going to talk briefly on climate change, impacts of climate change on wildfire, and then, with a little bit of time spending on what do we do, okay? So when one talks about fire, there's the direct impacts of the fire, and the picture in the far left, that's the Coquihalla Highway, the main corridor from interior BC to the coast, 2021. Lots of fire along the Coquihalla. Indirect impacts is smoke. That's a satellite picture, and this GOES satellite that we just looked at. And you can see the smoke in the valleys, and that's where the people live. Okay? So that's indirect. And the third is kind of cascading effects. Here's the Coquihalla Highway once again in November of 2021 after atmospheric river events that caused all sorts of flooding, debris flows, and closed the Coquihalla. Matter of fact, it closed all the highways from the interior to the coast in BC, and one had to go down to Washington State to get to the coast. So here's a diagram. It just shows the interaction between fire and our earth system, our climate system, from smoke and those pyro-CBs and sediments, and it affects water quality, deposits on ice, changes the albedo, the reflectivity, which causes the ice to melt more quickly. It just is a major factor in a number of aspects in our earth system. So my talk is primarily on Canada, but much of this applies to other parts of the world, like Western United States, Alaska, Siberia. In Canada, most of our fires are human-caused in spring and lightning-caused in the summer. And we average about 6,000 fires. And actually, the number's been going down, primarily because the human-caused fires, the numbers have been going down. If you look at a 10-year running average, we're averaging about 4 million hectares a year. That's getting 80% of the size of Nova Scotia. And that's a quadrupling of what's happened since the 1970s. And my colleagues and I attribute this largely, not solely, but largely to human-caused climate change. 2023 fire season was off the charts, record-breaking, record-smashing. Most of these fires are high-intensity, high-severity crown fires. So spreading from the forest floor to the tops or crowns of the tree. High intensity, difficult to impossible to manage. Area burn is highly episodic. Okay? I'll give you an example of BC, in that graph in the bottom left, and that's area burn by year, 1950 to present. 2017 to 2024 is in red. Areas in red burn more than the areas in green. Okay? And the top 5 years are since 2017. So abrupt increase in fire. And I attribute this largely, but not solely, to our warming climate. I'll talk more about that. Lightning, about 50% of the fires in Canada are started by lightning, but they represent 90% of the area burn. Fires about the extremes. 3% of our fires in Canada are bigger than 200 hectares. Hectares is a little bit larger than a football field, but they represent 97% of the area burn. And much of this happens on a relatively small number of days. We call them spread days, hot, dry, windy, where fires actively spread. So this just shows a map from Canada. Fires just isn't a BC problem or Alberta problem. It's from sea to sea to sea, and this shows, the evacuations that have taken place. And, wherever we live in a flammable landscape. So there are fires when we have communities or infrastructure, they at times are at risk. So We often talk about the human wildland interface. There's an industrial interface as well as an infrastructure interface. And in Canada, you can see it's mostly the southern tier. There's some areas like in Alberta and partially into BC where it's going farther north, but it's basically where people and their activities are. So basically, there's three types of fire: ground fire, which burns into the ground; surface fire; and ground fire. Canada conifers are much more flammable than deciduous, though deciduous do burn. I have colleagues who like to call it aspen the asbestos forest, but that's not true. Fort McMurray is surrounded by aspen, and it burned, as we may recall, a 2016 fire, which is the costliest disaster in Canadian history, at least modern Canadian history. It's almost impossible to extinguish a large ground fire. Even when things are extreme, you can put the fire out if you get to it when it's small, okay? But that means it needs to be detected and actioned right away. We call it initial attack. And fire typically enters a community through embers carried by the wind, little burning bits of bark or twig, needles, and sometimes even pine cones. And these can travel 2 kilometers or more. The McDougall Creek fire in Kelowna, West Kelowna, it jumped Lake Okanagan, which was at least 2.5 to 3 kilometers. So in Canada, fires are natural for most of our forests, and they actually survive and thrive. And semi-regular stand renewing, stand replacing crown fire, it obviously removes the competition, allows sunlight to reach the forest floor, removes the organic layer, so it prepares the seed bed. And trees have various strategies to deal with this. Some of them have what we call serotinous cones, and it's just cones sealed with waxy resin. And you actually need the heat from the fire to open that cone. Jack pine, lodgepole pine, black spruce are examples. Suckering, aspen, fire can go through, kill the tree above ground, but the roots survive. And then you get, like hair on dog's back, you get the aspen coming back. And some species, like some of the pines, have thick bark, red pine, white pine, can survive most fires, but not crown fires. And some have a seed bank and pop up after the fire because they put their seed in the soil. So fire management. Canadian Fire Management Agency is among the best in the world. We use something called the Canadian Forest Fire Danger Rating System, and parts of it are the de facto standard for the globe. The people around the world use the FWI system, Fire Weather Index. Fire management is challenging and becoming more challenging due to increased demands, climate change, and I actually think the public's expectations has increased over time, that they expect them to be successful all the time. And most fire management agencies are able to put 95% of the fires while they're still small. If I got 95% on a test, I'd be happy. But it's that last 5%, that last 3% that cause all our problems. So, we've been spending $1 billion a year. Actually, that's been increasing and will continue to increase. Places like California typically spend multiple $1 billion a year. I didn't talk too much about the costs from these fires, but it's going to be tens of billions of dollars. I wouldn't be surprised it passes 100 billion, and it's not over yet, so it's hard to say. I'll talk a bit about smoke, but it's really damaging. We're seeing more disasters. Okay, and I expect that trend to continue. There is something called a Canadian Disaster Database. It's difficult to get the more recent years. The data is there, but it's in a different format than previously. But we are seeing more disasters. So impacts. And the picture here is from that's from Slave Lake in 2011, and the fires coming towards town. The winds were 100 kilometers per hour at times, and we had spot fires occurring in town while the head of the fire was still 2 kilometers away. So, there's been lots of notable fires globally and within Canada. Lytton 2021, Jasper in 2024, talking about the LA Basin fires now. Recent studies suggest that globally 1.5 million people per year die due to exposure of wildland fire smoke, which is significant. Smoke, the thing about smoke is it can travel long distances. And so here's once again a satellite picture. There's California, there's for this picture, there's lots of fires in Oregon, and you can see the smoke wrapped around a low pressure system in the Pacific. It's also being sucked down to a low pressure system off Mexico, as well as being sucked into a low pressure system in eastern Canada, United States. Like we think back to the 2023 fires, where people in New York City were smoked out because of fires 1,000 kilometers away in Quebec. So that's the problem. And the more we know about smoke, the more we know it's really bad for human health. So here's my recipe for fire. And this applies to California, Canada, Amazon, you name it. Fuel, the vegetation, we call it fuel. We're fire people. How much, what type, how dry. Ignition, people, and lightning are the common ones. As I said, in Canada, it's about 50-50. Globally, it's about 97%, 98% are human caused. Weather, hot, dry, windy, in particular extreme weather, like we just saw in the Los Angeles basin. The bottom right there is a picture of what we call overwintering fire. Some people have coined it a zombie fire because it doesn't die. And, some of these peat fires in Indonesia have been burning for 30 years. In Canada, it generally just overwinters 1 year, though the 2023 fires, I wouldn't be surprised if some of them survive into 2025. Fort McMurray fire, for example, started May 1st, 2016, declared out summer 2017. So it's not unheard of, but we're seeing, after 2023, we're seeing a lot more of these overwintering fires. So very simply, okay, our sun's surface temperature is about 6,000 degrees, sends its energy as shortwave radiation. Earth is about 300 degrees Kelvin, and it emits most of its energy as long waves. Our atmosphere is composed of gases like water vapor, carbon dioxide, that are more or less transparent to short waves, but more opaque to long waves. So it traps that heat in. I liken it to on a cold winter's night, throwing another blanket on your bed. It just traps the heat, and that's exactly what's going on. And, if you're looking at other planets in our solar system, we're kind of a Goldilocks planet. Even without, we have a natural greenhouse effect because carbon dioxide, water vapor are part of our atmosphere, and it's actually contributing about 30 degrees Celsius warming. So we'd be a much colder place without this in place. Places like Venus, the greenhouse effect is 500 degrees and they're cooking. And in Mars, it's not very large and they're cold. So we're just right, not too hot, not too cold, Goldilocks. Okay. So we have records of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere going back hundreds of thousands of years. From ice cores in Greenland and Antarctica with trapped air bubbles, and they measure how much carbon dioxide's in them. And pre-industrial was at 270, 280, and then we started burning fossil fuels, among other things, and it's gone up and up and up, up. And this is data from Mauna Loa, Big Island, Hawaii. It's our longest continuous record from the late 50s, and we're over 420 parts per million. And the last time Earth was at this level of carbon dioxide was about 3 to 4 million years ago. It was a much warmer planet at that time, and that's the direction we're heading. There's also methane, and it's increasing even more rapidly than carbon dioxide, and it's measuring parts per billion as opposed to parts per million for carbon dioxide, but it's about 80 times more effective as a greenhouse warming gas as compared to carbon dioxide. So this is a concern, and why is this happening? There's a lot of research going on to figure out why is it increasing so rapidly. The data is just coming out for 2024 global temperature, and there's a number of global data sets. There are indications from this one that just came out yesterday or the day before, about 1.6 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial. so well past a Paris Accord agreement. It's just 1 year, I know, but 2023 wasn't far behind that. It was just below 1.5, but you can see a clear trend, and yeah, I don't see it stopping anytime soon. All right. This is from a NASA site, and it just shows last year compared to 51 to 80 as a baseline, and you can see in degrees Celsius, blues are below, colder than the average, yellows, reds, oranges above, and you can see much of the Earth is much warmer than that baseline. Okay, and if you look at it by latitudinal band, in particular, high latitude northern areas like Canada are warming much more rapidly than the rest of the globe. And this is the data for that period, which is a year, but it's not quite the calendar year. So here's daily temperatures, and you can see 2024 is that kind of yellow color. We're just getting to 2025, and it's starting on a very similar trend. It was supposed to be a La Nina, was supposed to start months ago. According to predictions, we're still neutral. So yeah, I don't expect 2025 to be a record-breaking year, but it's going to be another warm year, despite the forecast. And we may still reach La Nina for a couple of months, but it's hot, okay, and going to get hotter compared to recent years. So, Canada's warming at twice the rate of the rest of the globe. If you look at the Arctic areas, it's more like 3 or 4 times the rate of the rest of the globe. So high northern areas are warming much more rapidly than other areas. So this is just animation. This is American animation, so it's in degrees Fahrenheit. Once again, the reds, the oranges are above normal. The blues are below normal. And you can kind of see that the years in the bottom center there, it's kind of salt and pepper, black and white, until about the late 70s. And then you see the Earth starting to become a much warmer place. So, researchers and policymakers, etc., we use models. Okay, and they're not perfect, but they're probably the best tool we have. And we expect more extremes, greatest increases in winter, spring, high latitudes. Temperatures are increasing the models have been pretty good, though the last couple of years seem to be edging increasing more rapidly than I would expect. But the biggest thing is the impacts are much more than what we earlier anticipated. And that's the biggest concern, is the impacts. I give numbers, number of fires, area burned, but it's really about the impacts on people and our economy, and the impacts are increasing much more rapidly than we thought. Now, if all the countries honor their agreements in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we'll be near the blue line, which is by the end of the century, that's 3 degrees warming. We're at 1.5, and you can see the impacts. Imagine what 3 is like. I don't want to, but the problem is that most of the countries, including Canada, their record at meeting their targets is abysmal. Okay, like we haven't been doing a good job. Okay, and the COP process, Convention of Parties, which is supposed to be addressing climate change, warming, global community, really is moving away from mitigation to adaptation. And yeah, I'm kind of almost disgusted with their activities. Here's another model. This is a Canadian model, so it's in degrees Celsius, and yes, that's 10 and 15 degrees Celsius at the bottom. Top right, you can see the year going by, and yeah, this is a pessimistic scenario, but people are getting pessimistic about how much impacts and warming we're going to see with climate change. And I'm trying to find any areas that get cooler, and I'm not seeing anything. It's going to get warmer and warmer and warmer and warmer, and that's a big deal for fire. And I'll talk shortly about, because people ask me, why is temperature so important to fire? Good question. So let's move along here. There's 3 reasons. Fire people love 3s for whatever reason. First is longer fire seasons, and we're seeing that in Canada. Alberta, for example, officially started their fire season in February last year. They used to have their fire season start April 1st, they moved to March 1st, and last year was in February. We had fires in BC in February. We had fires in November. So we're moving towards a fire year. California already has fire year. They don't really talk about seasons unless you talk about the Northern California. Second, the warmer we get, the more lightning we expect. I'm not sure if we've realized that yet, but that's what research suggests. And more lightning means more fire, all things considered equal, but actually things aren't equal because we expect drier fuels with warming. What is going on here? As the atmosphere warms, the ability to suck moisture out of the fuel, here I'm talking about dead fuel on the forest floor, needles, leaves, twigs, increases exponentially with warming. Unless we see more rain to compensate for this drying effect from the warmer temperatures, our fuels are going to be drier. But most of the models of the future suggest our summers are going to be the same or even drier in places like BC. So the bottom line is drier fuels, and this is a critical piece to understanding fire. We got bone dry fuels in Southern California right now. The drier the fuel, the easier it is for a fire to start, easier it is for a fire to spread, and more of that material is dried out, available to burn, which leads to these higher intensity fires that are difficult to impossible to extinguish. So a warmer world means more fire. We're seeing more extreme fire weather. This was published a few years ago, and globally in North America, and you can see, most of the strongest increases are from Texas to British Columbia. I showed you how much fire we've seen in British Columbia recently. Western United States has seen a quadrupling of fire since the 1970s. California's a quintupling, 5 times increase. And where will it stop? I don't know. I just expect we're going to see more fire. Catastrophic losses, you probably have all seen this, so I won't spend too much time on it, though I'll say that 7.7 number for Canada for 2024, that was before the atmospheric river event in British Columbia, which probably pushed it up past 8. You probably know better than I do, but yeah, you can see the trend, and I expect this trend to continue. We're seeing more extreme fires. The intensity is increasing, and it's due to, in part, pyro-CBs. Fire severity is increasing. A paper just came out. Carbon emissions for 2023 extreme season, 650 teragrams. That's about the normal amount of fossil fuel production from India, Canada. Our forests are often carbon sources rather than sinks due to things like insects and fire. Global forest fire emissions are increasing due largely to forests in the boreal and temperate systems. So what can we do? Okay? And I don't have enough time. I'll start by saying there's no quick fix. There's no silver bullet. It's going to take a lot of work, okay, and a lot of money, okay. Enhanced National Fire Risk Assessment. In the map you see is a broad brush for Canada, done by the National Research Council. I'm in BC here, and they say it's moderate. Well, I would argue that we're definitely not moderate. Okay, update Canadian Forest Fire Danger System. It's a great system, but it's 40 to 50 years old, and Canadian Forest Service, Natural Resources Canada is updating it as we speak. Use Indigenous and local knowledge. There's lots of things we can still learn and avail ourselves to. Fire Smart Canada, 7 principles, great. I would recommend it being mandatory in high-risk locations. And you need that National Fire Risk Assessment to determine that. In the States, they have First Street, they have Zillow, but they don't often agree. So anyway, but we need additional information to make decisions. And the reason I say it should be mandatory is I live in a neighborhood. I've got neighbors close to me. I'm fire smart. Let's just say for argument, they're not. Embers come, their place catches on fire, and then it spreads structure to structure to mine, even though I've done everything right. Sprinklers do help a great deal, structural protection, especially if you can run them a long period of time before the fire comes. Building materials, building codes, and next month you'll hear something about that. That's great. Part of the issue with fire is governance, and some of the things are controlled by municipalities, some are provincial, and some are federal. So getting a coordinated approach can be challenging. For very remote locations, instead of evacuating, we could build fire emergency shelters, and they could be dual purpose town halls, arenas, and things like that. Something to think about. Every community needs the emergency management plan, not just for fire, but for floods. And places like Metro Vancouver, they have a great one. They even include climate change. But small communities, they can't afford that. They don't have the people or the funding. Okay? And phases include emergency management, prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, recovery, sometimes review. More emphasis on prevention and mitigation. Ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and studies on fire suggest that's the case. Need for enhanced early warning system. We're pretty good at using fire bans, but forest closures are a tool that are very effective for stopping human-caused fires. And it is just what it says it is. You close the forest to industrial activities and recreational activities. Very unpopular, but very effective. So I'm going to wrap up here in a second. We expect more extreme fire weather and regionally more fire activity in the future. Fire management has to adapt to this new reality. I don't like new normal because it's not a plateau. We're going down, okay? And we're in a new territory without historical analogs, so we can't just use our experience and say, hey, because we're entering things we've never seen before. I would consider 2023 as an example of that. Fire and society interactions will increase in the future. We have to kind of learn to live with fire and smoke. Yeah, not easy. We'll see more pyro CBs, those fire generated thunderstorms, more wildfires burning into the night. Fire is a multifaceted issue, and we'll need multi-pronged approaches. And there's another pyro CB. This is the highway going to Yellowknife. And this guy here melted the internet cable for the high speed to Yellowknife, and they were without high-speed internet for a while. Some of the sponsors, some of the social media. I'm off Twitter, I'm off X, whatever you want to call it. I'm on Blue Sky now. The Canada Wildfires on Instagram, and we have YouTube. And yeah, check out the website or social media if you have a chance, and I'll stop there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike. Okay, so we have a few questions so far. An anonymous attendee says, I just read a post that Malibu and the Palisades residential areas are built directly on an ecosystem of foliage that's particularly susceptible to fire. Mike Davis wrote about this in his book, Ecology of Fear. Have you heard of this, or do you have any thought?
So, yeah, I've been there, and I am not a chaparral expert. I'm a fire weather guy, and this is a flammable landscape. Like much of Canada, it's a very flammable landscape, and historically, some of these areas were burning every 20 years. But the landscape has been greatly modified, but the fire weather has not. And fire weather is actually seems to be getting worse. So I've also heard that there's lots of people who are not insured or had their insurance policies removed recently prior to these fires. It's a challenge, and these are areas that are very flammable. But instead of chaparral, now you have palm trees. Palms, some of the palms are very flammable because they have a lot of dead material in the crown. And I'm sure you've seen some of the videos of all those embers coming, and some of them are coming from palms or other ornamentals. But some of the new subdivisions in California mandate FireWise, Fire Smart Canada, no flammable material within 5 for the Californians within 5 feet of your home. So if it's mandatory, that helps. You still need sprinklers because those embers can be a problem. But yeah, I'll stop there. It's a very challenging situation, and you know,
Right. I'm gonna offer the same attendees follow-up question because it's closely related. Um, the attendee asks, are humans partly to blame for a lack of strategic land use planning in this case?
yeah, I would agree with that. And when you're planning a community, sometimes you don't really consider mass evacuations like we saw on the Pacific Coast Highway and all those abandoned cars. Um, I live in Kamloops and we have a neighborhood here with only one road in and out. And there was a fire approaching it 2021 during our heat event, and it was a parking lot. All right. Fortunately, some rain came and stopped, but Fort McMurray, fortunately there was road going north and road going south, and they used all four lanes for egress. Okay, like it's a multi-lane highway, but instead of both directions, they were all going one direction. But if you had a major accident with 18-wheeler or something, and the studies have shown that sometimes the fatalities, like Black Saturday in Australia, were people trapped in their cars and the fire overtook them in their cars. And the death total was 170 some in those Black Saturday fires. So you have to take into account, that exit strategy, but also, when you plan a community, things like soccer fields, green grass is a very effective fire break. Okay, golf courses, sports areas, whether it's soccer, baseball, football, the planning of the location of those, around the forest or other flammable material. And of course, one of the principles of Fire Smart is to thin out or change the type of vegetation around communities. Like I keep mentioning conifers in this part of the world. In Australia, it's eucalypts, but here it's conifers. And do we remove all conifers within 2 to 3 kilometers? Yeah, we can't afford that. All right, and people would rail against you. Okay, the public wouldn't allow it, but we could reduce it so that it's not a close canopy conifer forest. So, and aspen, as I say, is less flammable, and it doesn't stop the fire, but makes a fire lower intensity, so you have a chance to put it out. Okay, so we should be doing all these things to try and reduce the risk of fire.
Awesome. Kevin Deneen asks, I see the temperature extremes will be in the polar extremities, but will the equatorial area still be livable or adaptable in the next couple of decades?
Okay, so parts of equatorial areas will not be survivable without air conditioning. Okay, as the wet bulb temperature rises, so your body sweat doesn't cool you off, you're snookered, okay, without air conditioning. Other places like Hawaii, islands and oceanic areas, they'll be survivable, long term. I don't see any problems there. But what I was just looking at a book called Climate Wars by Drier, and people are going to have to leave some of these regions, and some of these regions, like India, are heavily populated. And where will they go? It sounds like fiction, and that book was written decades ago, but it is concerning about as a global society, if you've got 1 billion people or 2 billion people living in areas that are uninhabitable without air conditioning. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Christine Calhoun asks, what does a fire emergency shelter look like? Would this accommodate the community?
Okay. So, we already have cooling centers for heat events. This would be a building with non-flammable material, concrete, cement, steel, what have you, and large enough. Most of the evacuations are in northern, often indigenous communities. a couple hundred people, okay, sometimes 1,000. Evacuation is traumatic, okay, and sometimes you're gone for weeks, even months. So, and often it's of abundance of caution to evacuate people. Many times the town does not burn down, okay? Sometimes it's due to smoke that people get evacuated. So if you had something like a hockey arena that is fireproof with a clean air supply system, a filtering system, you could just hunker down there until the fire passes, or if it never arrives, then you go about your daily life, which much less. And I know that High Level was talking about this after they were evacuating the 2019 Chuckade Creek fires. Whether they did it or not, I don't know. Okay.
Okay, thanks. My colleague Slobodan Simonovic says, thank you for the presentation. We have to live with fires. We also have to live with floods. Can something be done to link these two types of disasters? Can we store water during the high flows, the floods, and use it during dry periods, fires? Yesterday, firefighters in LA ran out of water.
Thanks. So, that's something I didn't suggest. When a fire enters a community, it it's not unusual for municipal power to go down and then municipal water pressure to go. It happened in Slave Lake, it happened in Fort McMurray, now it's happening in parts of Los Angeles and surrounding areas. And this happens. Now, the question about water storage, see, dams almost have two diametrically opposing options. One is to preserve water to use, whether it's for agriculture or for commercial or for residential use or for to fight fires. But the other action of the dam is to stop flooding. So one is you want to keep it at the highest level if you want to use the water. If you want to prevent flooding, you want to keep the reservoir at the lowest level. And until they sort things out like this, and I'm not a water engineer, but these are some of the things you have to wrestle with. So yeah, and water is going, I would say oil was the commodity of the 20th century. Water is going to be the community of the 21st century. I expect we're going to get calls. The American Southwest, the population's growing and the need for water is increasing, and we'll be talking about pipelines of water instead of pipelines of oil, and they'll be wanting our Canadian water. Canada has 10% of the fresh water in the world, and yeah, so fire mitigation actions bring you most hope for the future. Oh man, I'm still a little bit optimistic. I used to be more optimistic, just a little bit, because we're getting bloody noses, and we can change our behavior. It's just being motivated enough to actually do it. Okay, so let's hope we can do it. And with respect to fire, okay, there's a couple ways of looking at it. Okay, so if you look at the three ingredients, okay, wet extreme fire weather, we can't really do anything about that until we address climate change. Okay, lightning, we can't really do anything about lightning until we address climate change. Okay, human caused fires, education, fire bans, forest closures, numbers are going down in Canada, and that's great. Okay, and let's keep that trend up. So another thing is, the third ingredient is the vegetation, the fuel, and we've already talked about fire smart around flammable materials near your house, including vegetation around your community. Absolutely. So that's one way of looking at it. The other way is to look at the emergency management phases: prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, recovery. Fire management is really good at response. Preparation, yeah, they're pretty good. There's room for improvement. Prevention and mitigation, yeah, we could do more, and we are doing more. It costs money, but ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure. So we could be spending more effort that in. And I will say something, that we need to be more proactive. We're often, as a as an agency more reactive. Okay, and I'll give you an example from California. Governor Newsom asked for help from FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. We don't even have a FEMA type agency in Canada. When we have problems, we call in the military, okay? We need a FEMA type agency in Canada. Oh, we absolutely, not just for fire, but for floods, earthquakes, you name it, okay? He asked for money for extra resources and personnel, and FEMA approved it. But the governor asked it after the fires had started. The weather forecast was bang on. They were saying major Santa Ana coming, and for a week in advance. That's when you ask. That's when you bring down extra planes from Quebec or BC, extra people, because, as I mentioned, if you get to the fire when it's small, you can put it out, even under extreme conditions. So additional resources, would have stopped all the fires? Probably not. But if it stopped one or two, it more than pays for itself. If you would have stopped the Eaton fire or the Palisade fire, yeah. Or, the Fort McMurray fire or the Jasper fire, yeah, So getting on, and to their credit, things are changing. 2024, BC Wildfire Service and Alberta Wildfire both called in extra resources from across Canada. I'm not sure if they got some from the States as well, because the weather forecast said extreme conditions were coming. So we're on our way, but we should have a systematic decision-based process that helps us be more proactive. And I think we need a FEMA in Canada for fire, because calling the military, it's great to have the military help out, but they don't have all the training you need and the experience, and it really needs to be quick deploy, okay? Because sometimes, I'll back up for a second. Right now, if it's a reactive sense, okay? So if BC or Alberta calls for help, it contacts CIFC, Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center in Winnipeg. Then they see who has resources. Maybe it's Ontario, maybe it's Quebec, and send people and equipment. It takes 3 days for that firefighter or helicopter or pump and hose to get to the fire. 3 days from the time you call. So if you call when the fire started, they get there 3 days, and sometimes they come and the fire's it's all done, okay? The game's over, okay? That call should take place like 5 days in advance, so the people can get there and set up. Anyway, you can tell that I'm on my soapbox, so.
Now, I'm a gray infrastructure guy. I said, as a structural engineer, I see everything having a structural solution. So, when I think about, well, what could we do, I immediately go to the fact that the United States has two building codes that deal with wildland urban interface fire, the California Chapter 7A and the International Wildland Urban Interface Code. Canada doesn't have one of those. It's got a National Fire Guide that is not yet in code language. What is your feeling about the role of fire-resistant construction in managing our fire future?
So, and there's a number of efforts, but you're right, it's not code, not yet, okay? And hopefully we do get to that point. They're more like guidelines, okay? I think that can help a lot by using proper building material, and even like, these embers can be quite small, but if you use a fine mesh for, a lot of our homes have ventilations in the attics, you gotta make sure you have protect from getting those embers coming into the attic, because that's another way that things, but some of it, you can do the right thing for all the building materials and codes, but people don't clean their eaves troughs, okay? And you get a buildup of needles and leaves that are dry, ember hits them. That's another way. Fire's opportunistic. It's probing. It's just looking for something to burn. And if you give it an opportunity, and Slave Lake, I went to a house and it was fire smart except for one thing, but that's all the fire needed. So what they had was a strip of mulch along the driveway, and it was like a wick. The fire just went up, that mulch burned the house down. And they're crap, like if there hadn't been that mulch there, would it have burned down? Maybe not. But yeah, absolutely, we need to move forward. But it kind of gets at the point of governance and the code system and getting everyone on the same page. But Canada, we absolutely have to make a code.
Thanks. So an anonymous attendee asks, could increased production of beef on the planet be one of the causes for increased methane?
Yes, it could. I mean, there's some recent papers suggesting that permafrost thaw directly from warming temperatures as well as fire often accelerates the permafrost thaw because a fire afterwards is generally black and that's much warmer. It doesn't reflect the solar radiation as much as a green surface does. So it's a warmer surface which helps thaw the permafrost. And the permafrost has lots of hydrates, i.e. methane, that have been frozen, but once it thaws, it releases. So
Mhm.
this is, yeah, absolutely, but there's a number of reasons why we're seeing more methane, but it is increasing rapidly.
Okay. Christine Calhoun says that she recommends not resorting to hope and to instead elect true leaders who know that we all need to be the change. Governance is critical, as is effective government and a working electorate. Any comments on her comment?
Yeah, I do. Okay. There's a couple things. I spend a lot of time with media, and I do that because an informed public is the best way forward. Okay. I agree with, I'm concerned. I'll speak to Canada first. Okay. We may be, very likely to have an election probably around May. And the party platforms right now either don't say much about climate change or are backing away from climate change. And globally, if you look to the south, drill, baby, drill, and, coal mine in Alberta. I mean, yeah, I'm disappointed is a polite term at our leaders or lack of leadership that we're seeing right now in our political parties, because this is the issue of our generation. I used to worry about my grandchildren, what their future looked like, and then started worrying about my children's future. Now I'm worried about my future, and I'm not a spring chicken, okay?
Mm.
Because things are changing much more rapidly than we thought, and we need to get on the same page and get things done. Individuals, communities, provinces, states, industry, countries, the global society. And right now, I'm not seeing it, okay? And that's scary, okay?
Thanks. An anonymous attendee asks, I read that hotels in Alberta and BC were going to be mandated as evacuation shelters. Can you comment on that?
So during a wildfire event, when there's evacuations, people need places to stay. So yeah, I don't, I think it's not a bad idea, okay?
Okay. Christine Calhoun says, thank you for what you do, Mike. Really appreciate your insight and passion. I have I think one more question. This is a sort of a technical, weedy one. Your map on slide 36 showed the prairies having low wildfire hazard.
Yeah, it's not
Um,
my map, but yes,
uh,
okay.
the
The
National
map on the
Resource,
slide, yes, okay.
yeah, the NRC map showed the prairies in yellow, which they said was low wildfire hazard.
Okay.
Um, what does that what does that kind of mean in terms of burn rate?
So, you know, because there's agriculture, okay, going on during much of this land as compared to what was in the past, these areas can still burn. And, you know, yeah, I really don't like that map, okay? And I kind of show it as a need to have a better map
Hmm.
because it gives an impression that, mostly we're talking about grass fires or vegetation fires. And people think, oh, grass fires aren't dangerous. Grass fires can burn your home down. People die in grass fires. They are still serious, okay? And they can be at times large, okay? There's been fires in southern Alberta that have been significant. The Grantham fire ran 50 kilometers in a day, okay? in December of 1997. So yeah, I really, having only three categories and broad brush, yeah, we need something much more detailed. Now, in the States, there's something called First Street, and it has
Mhm.
every structure, okay? But as I said, there's new products out now, and in certain areas, they have completely different risk values for the same location. So
Mhm.
that's, different products.
Jennifer Penny asks, how should we be approaching rebuilding after wildfire?
So yeah, this is, it takes way too long, okay? There was just a story here. Lytton burned down June 30th, 2021, okay? The mayor was just back into her house. So that's like three and a half years later, okay? No, we got to do better getting, but build back better. So we build back with building codes so to reduce the risk of it burning down again. Okay. But the problem historically has been, I heard this from Fort McMurray people who said, they had to rebuild, but, they have budget. But do you want quartz countertops or do you want to make your place more fire resistant? Many of them went for the quartz countertops because, hey, so yeah, we have to have regulations and yeah, people hate regulations, but for
Mhm.
certain things in certain areas, we need them. You can't, we shouldn't be building in floodplains. If we're in a high fire risk location, should we not build back? That should be explored, okay? And, but if you do, you have to build back better, okay?
Well, and therein lies a little tale. Lytton, after the fire, did adopt a bylaw that would have required um, building back non-combustible construction, sort of in compliance with the gist of the National Wildland Urban Interface Fire Guide. But there was funding to pay any extra costs, an extra 10 grand, which is more than enough for what was needed there. But the residents were so incensed that they threw out the city council that had adopted that local bylaw and repealed it. So they're building back exactly as vulnerable as they were before, out of not because it was costly, but because they didn't like to be told what to do.
So
Uh,
I'll tell you a story, okay? Box Canyon, San Diego County, okay? For probably most people understand, Box Canyon is probably the most dangerous place to be for fire, okay? Because if fire starts in the mouth, you're trapped unless you have a helicopter or you can climb rocks, okay? USDA Forest Service went to all the landowners, homeowners there, said, we'll clean up the vegetation. We won't take any trees down that you don't want down, and we won't charge you a cent for free. Half of them said, get off my property. Don't want to see you. Just like, so if it's voluntary, well, we bump into people like that. All right.
yeah.
That's why it has to be mandated. All right. Anyway, I see the next question, and this is actually something I meant to talk about. All right. So
Go ahead
air
and read it.
quality right now in Los Angeles and places is crap. Okay. And unfortunately, because so many structures have burned down, like plastics and things like that, mask wearing is recommended. Okay. And the masks that you wear for COVID were actually developed for fire, for smoke. Okay. So you should be wearing a mask. Air quality is, yeah, it's an issue, and as I mentioned, it can travel 1,000 kilometers and smoke you out. And you know, some of my colleagues, and I think even I in the past may have said, a little smoke now saves you, big smoke later, and that's just not the case because smoke travels 1,000 kilometers. So if you're in Vancouver, you do some prescribed burning around Vancouver, doesn't mean Oregon or Washington or Northern California has a large fire and smokes you out. All right. And I often say there's good fire. Ecologically, it's Mother Nature at work. There's bad fire. We don't want communities burning down. There's no such thing as good smoke, as my colleague Sarah Henderson says. Smoke is bad. And this is a problem for prescribed fire because it generates smoke and people have respiratory issues. And as I said, the more we know about smoke, the more we know it's really bad for people.
Well, we have gone through the questions, and I don't have any more for you. So I think we can wrap up a little bit early, unless you have any final thoughts you want to leave us with?
No, I think we've had a healthy discussion. I hope everyone enjoyed it. And, if you want to talk to me, I assume my email will be somewhere. If not, just Google me and it's mflannigan@tru.ca. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike. And thanks to our attendees for coming and hearing us today. Again, on February 14th, we're going to hear from IBHS and about their new Wildfire Prepared Homes certification program. So join us then. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.